Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you may be. We welcome you to today's meeting to discuss the seminal event for Barth Syndrome Foundation that we are hosting, called the Externally Led Patient-Focused Drug Development Meeting, otherwise known as the PFDD meeting, which will be with the FDA in Clearwater on July 18th. For today's call, we have James Valentine, who is our PFDD moderator, and Kate McCurdy, who all of you know from Science and Medicine Advisory Board. And I am Emily Milligan. For those of you who have not yet met me, I look forward to meeting you in person or on the phone prior to our international conference. Kate and James will explain today what the PFDD meeting is, its importance for putting Barth syndrome on the radar with our regulators at the FDA who approve products for our affected individuals, and most importantly, your unique and critical role in the success of that meeting. Now, prior to beginning, I have a little bit of housekeeping, and I want to address that this is going to sound slightly impersonal. You are all muted. That is because we had a really good turnout for this call, and it's not that we wanted to keep you at a distance. It was just the only way to handle this meeting. But should you have a question, we want you to participate. So please use the question feature in the GoToWebinar panel, which you should all see on your computer. I would like for you to take just 10 seconds and locate that question box and type something in there, whether it's hello, good morning, whatever it may be. There, I see a couple popping up. Thank you. Perfect. All right. Looks like everybody's figured out how to use it. If by chance you have any trouble with that, email me, emily.milligan@barthsyndrome.org, and I will correspond with you offline. So with that, I'm going to turn over the presentation to James, and then Kate will follow. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to all of you. This is James Valentine, and I am very excited to be the moderator of your patient-focused drug development meeting for Barth syndrome, which is being, of course, run by your organization, the Barth Syndrome Foundation. I've had the opportunity and pleasure to have been involved in patient engagement with the Food and Drug Administration for the last 10 years, and I'm really excited that this type of opportunity to have a large portion of your patient community engage face-to-face with FDA through this PFDD meeting. Very excited to have this opportunity occurring and to give you some background about these meetings and why it's so important for your participation. Kate and I will be co-presenting. I'll be starting us off with some background on the PFDD initiative and where it fits into FDA decision-making. Then Kate's going to take it away and talk about the specifics of the Barth syndrome PFDD meeting that the Foundation has been planning over the last several months. And please do send any questions that you might have while we're presenting. You can go ahead and send them in, and we'll take them as we go, as well as save time at the end for some Q&A. So for the background on patient-focused drug development, this is, really a great opportunity to be able to have the patient voice, your voices, and when I say patient voice, I mean not just that of individuals affected with Barth syndrome, but of course their caregivers and family members who help care for them, to have your voice heard and help influence and drive FDA decision-making in a way that will really be patient-centric and making sure that FDA decisions are well-informed. So as background, I wanted to share a little bit about FDA's decision-making. As you know, FDA is the U.S. national drug regulatory body. They're the gatekeeper for the approval of new drugs. And so they have to make a approval decision whenever a new drug application, which is the marketing application, comes to the agency to determine whether the benefits of a drug outweigh the risks. And so it's important to note that FDA reviews these medical products on a case-by-case basis when it receives an application. So FDA is not the organization that's doing the research or conducting the clinical trials. They're not funding the clinical trials. That's done by academic researchers and pharmaceutical companies. But what they do is they receive all of the information that comes from those clinical trials, and they have to make determinations of whether products are safe and effective for use in the disease that they were studied. So knowing that, it's important to note that there's actually a couple of ways historically that patients and caregivers like yourselves can contribute to FDA's regulatory decision making. The first is patients and caregivers can consult and advise on a specific application. So for a particular drug that's been developed, when FDA is weighing in on the benefits and risks of the product, a patient or caregiver can be consulted, and FDA in fact has programs to do that. The other way is that the patient community can provide the context that is applicable to all applications in a particular disease. So this is information that is not specific to any given drug, but information that allows FDA to ensure that its decisions in a given disease, for any drug in a given disease, incorporate the experiences and preferences of patients and caregivers. And in fact, that's what patient-focused drug development was designed to do, is to be a systematic way to hear from a broad cross-section of a given patient community to help set the context for decision-making when it receives any application in that disease area. So to kind of drill down a level to help you kind of understand where this fits in, as I mentioned, when FDA makes an approval decision, it has to weigh the benefits against the risks of an investigational product. And the benefits have to outweigh those risks in order for FDA to approve the product. So what I would say is that the determination of what the benefits are and what the risks are, which are determined based off of the results of studies, is a scientific decision. And determining what the studies actually showed is a scientific decision that's made by FDA review staff. But there is a judgment involved then, once the benefits and risks of a drug are known, to determine whether for patient population the benefits actually outweigh the risks. And that's a subjective judgment call, and FDA has acknowledged that. And so in developing the benefit risk assessment framework, which you see on this slide, FDA has recognized that there's actually a lot of context that needs to be established before it can make that judgment call about benefit and risk. And those two categories of information are the analysis of condition, which is essentially what are the symptoms and burdens that have the greatest impact on a patient's daily life. And then second, the current treatment options, which is an assessment of current not only drugs, but also medical procedures, lifestyle modifications, really anything that a patient and their caregivers might do to try to help manage and live with the disease, how well those treatment options are working, and what are the downsides of those treatment options to help create kind of an assessment of what the current unmet medical needs in a patient community are. And so these two categories FDA refers to as the clinical context, and that helps them do that benefit risk calculus in deciding whether the benefits outweigh the risks. And so knowing that this context is not product specific, FDA has actually recognized that these are the two areas where learning from the experiences and preferences of patients directly can help provide FDA very valuable information. Now you might ask, well, FDA can certainly go to medical literature, and aren't there a lot of clinicians and researchers who know a lot about Barth syndrome and could just tell FDA everything that they need to know about, how severe and burdensome our disease is and, what treatments we have available. Well, FDA has recognized that, in fact, patients and caregivers are the experts in their own disease. And, ought to, in addition to those other types of sources of information, listen to patients and caregivers, listen and ask them particular questions that help establish these two categories of information. And what they found is, in fact, a lot of the things that they thought they knew about diseases, sometimes it confirmed them, but many other times, what clinicians might say is important to patients is very different than what patients themselves might say. And so it's important to have both of those categories of information. So in order to collect those two categories of information in a more systematic way, FDA created the Patient-Focused Drug Development Meeting. This started out about 6 years ago with FDA hosting a series of 25 meetings themselves in different disease areas. But in recent years, FDA, recognizing that they can't host all of these meetings themselves, have shifted to having patient organizations like Barth Syndrome Foundation to be able to request through a letter of intent the ability to hold one of these meetings. And luckily for the Barth Syndrome community, you have a great foundation that is advocating and supporting you and has already gone through this process, gotten FDA's buy-in. FDA is very excited about this opportunity and is working now with Barth Syndrome Foundation, which is planning this meeting, and you'll hear more about that. It's important to know that FDA will be attending this meeting, but it's really the foundation's meeting. So you'll notice that there'll be FDA participation, but the agenda itself is being developed by the foundation, and FDA will largely be there just in listening mode to hear and learn and listen and hear and listen and learn from you all. And then as part of this program, what will ultimately result from this, in addition to all of the learnings that FDA will have from their actual participation that day, is the foundation is going to be putting together a Voice of the Patient report that will be submitted to FDA. It will serve as the meeting summary, largely leveraging your own words from the meeting itself. And this will become a reference document for FDA reviewers whenever they're looking at any future application for a drug for Barth syndrome. So this is going to have a big impact in helping FDA serve as an educational resource to set that context for that benefit risk decision. If, for example, something that FDA did not realize was important to your patient community is something that ultimately is demonstrated in clinical trials for a drug to have an impact on that important symptom, then FDA will know to give that benefit of the drug appropriate weight when it's doing that benefit risk assessment. So this is very important. Part of FDA's decision making is to know how to properly weight benefits and risks when they're considering them ultimately. And this report will serve as a basis for helping them understand the context of Barth syndrome. So with that, I'll see, Emily, if there are any questions about the Patient-Focused Drug Development Initiative and where it fits into FDA approval decisions. But if not, I will turn it over to Kate to talk about the Barth syndrome PFDE.
Let's go ahead with Kate. We had several questions coming in, but I think Kate's narrative will address many of them, and then we'll turn it over to Q&A.
Terrific. Thank you.
Kate?
Hello, everybody. So glad you could join us today on this kickoff call. This is really a milestone meeting for us, and I think James did an excellent job of framing why it's so important for us. As he mentioned, we're something like the 30th meeting like this that has ever happened. So out of 7,000 rare diseases, we are very fortunate to be in this position right now. This is the first meeting that FDA has ever permitted outside of the Washington, D.C. area. So again, we are charting our own Barth way in this, and I'm sure it will be a great success. But to make it a success, we really need for everybody to be involved. Everyone who's in Florida, we need to come to this meeting, and we're going to have childcare going so that everyone will be able to get themselves free. We also need everybody who can't be in Florida to listen into the live stream and to participate in ways that I'll talk about in just a minute. But we just couldn't pass up this opportunity to hold this meeting while we are going to have more than 25% of the world's living population of Barth guys gathered in Florida. And it just seemed way too good an opportunity not to try to get this meeting in as well. So this meeting will be held on July 18th, sort of between the clinics, if you will, and the beginning of the main part of our conference in the afternoon. And you can see on the screen the overall agenda. Just to give you sort of a 30,000-foot view here, we have 4 people from the FDA who will be involved in our meeting. 2 are very distinguished executives at the FDA who will be present. And then you'll see later on we have 2 who actually are going to be with us just online, but giving comments as well. So after a welcome from Emily, we're going to begin with Celia Witten, who is a physician and the deputy director of what's called CBER at the FDA. For our purposes, FDA has 2 very important arms. One is called CBER with a B. B stands for biologics. So they oversee anything that's a biological product, including, importantly, from our point of view, gene therapy. So this is the deputy director of the group that oversees any application for gene therapy. And then later you'll see there's another arm called CDER with a D, D standing for drug. So any drug, any molecule that's approved by the FDA goes through that arm. And we also have some very distinguished folks from that arm coming. So we're in really good shape from the FDA point of view. So after Dr. Witten gives her opening remarks, we will hear from Colin Stewart, who is going to give people who are listening who may not know a whole lot about Barth syndrome, a clinical overview of our disease. And by the way, when I say people who are listening, we will have, we hope, a lot of FDA people listening in. We also will have industry people both there and possibly listening in. These are people who work for biotechs or biopharma who either are involved with our clinical trials already, like Stealth, or people that we hope maybe down the line will be interested in developing products for us. So all of the things that James explained so well about what we're trying to tell the FDA, there are also going to be industry people listening. So they will be interested in the same sorts of comments because they will inform how possibly clinical trials are designed going forward. And that also is important, very important. So I've gotten off track here, but so Colin will give the overview, and mostly he will lay out a little bit of the clinical things, but mostly we're going to leave that to the patients. He will talk about the genetic basis. He will talk about the biochemistry and the pathomechanisms of the disease. And then I'm going to talk about our family's experience with Barth, because it was quite extensive, of course. Will had a complicated case of Barth and had, I think, almost every aspect of the disease that is known. And I'll talk a little bit about the Barth syndrome family, because that's very important for people, for pharma who is interested in working on a disease, to know that there is a disease community that's very strong, that can support not only research, but can support the families as they're going through these experiences, and also give pharma access to patients, at least to let them know that a trial is going on, so then the patients can decide whether they're interested or not in partaking. And then James will give us an overview of the meeting. And then one of the important aspects is we are going to do some polling at several points throughout the meeting. So this is a way for everyone in the room who's a patient or a caregiver and everyone who's listening online who's a patient or caregiver can respond to various questions. And so we'll get statistics from a very broad base, which is a really interesting aspect of this. And then we will get to the meat of what's going to happen in that room, which is we are going to have two panels of 5 Barth guys and caregivers each. In each panel 1 and panel 2, we have 3 affected Barth guys. We have 1 dad and 1 mom. So the first panel will talk in greater detail about what it's like to live with Barth. And then if you jump down to panel 2, that panel will also say, since this is what it's like to live with Barth, this is currently what I do in order to treat my Barth as best I can. And what I really would like in a future treatment is X, Y, or Z. So that's an extremely important ingredient here. In between those 2 panels, we will have our second distinguished FDA presenter. Dr. White is the Director of Professional Affairs and Stakeholder Involvement in CDER. Remember, D is drug. And then we also are going to have a video of one of the older Barth gentlemen we know who is living. We are very aware that because almost everybody has to travel to get to this meeting, to get to the conference, and therefore the PFDD meeting, there is a whole group of people who perhaps are too ill to travel. And we wanted to make sure not to leave them out of this meeting. So there's a whole team that has been very involved. Stacy Woodward has been key in this. Shelley has been key in this. A video has been made of a gentleman out in Iowa who, as I say, is one of the older living Barth individuals in the world. And so he will get to give a testimony as well. And then dropping down to 4:30, we will have summary comments from 2 medical officers from FDA, one from CDER and one from CBER. Medical officers are the ones who actually look at each application and evaluate the risks and benefits that James was speaking of. So these people will tell us kind of what they've heard over the day and what they've gotten from this meeting. So I think it will be a very full and very important day for us. The next slide, James, just quickly is a list of the panelists. You probably know who most of those folks are, but again, just to summarize, it's 3 Barth guys and a dad and a mom in each. And then the next slide talks in a little greater detail about the kinds of things each panel will be speaking about. And the reason I go into a little more detail here is because at the end of each of the panel, there will be a time for both polling about questions, again, of the audience and anyone online, having to do with certain aspects of the testimony that's just been given. And then there also will be an opportunity for anyone in the room to come to the microphone and address the crowd about those particular topics for the panel. So anyone who's there will have an opportunity also to chime in and give their own very brief testimony about any subject. So we really want you to think about the kinds of things you might want to make sure are conveyed to the FDA. And if you feel either that you want to support a comment that somebody on the panel has made, or if you have something to add, please consider coming to the microphone and making your statement. That would be extremely helpful. So let's talk about the 2 panels in a little bit more detail, the first being living with Barth syndrome. So those panelists and then the discussants afterwards will talk about the symptoms that are experienced. And obviously there are many symptoms in our complex disorder, but we need to talk about probably the top one or three of the most significant ones in your life, and they may vary from person to person, which is the whole point of having a panel and to have broad discussion. Because by the end of this, we want to have a full picture of the disease. Are there specific activities that are important to you, but you can't do or can't do as often or as fully as you might like because of your disorder? Has your disorder changed over time? And what worries you most about Barth syndrome? Then the second panel, James, if we could get to, thank you. What are you currently doing to help with Barth syndrome? Do you have acupuncture? Do you take ibuprofen? Do you have a second set of books at home because you can't carry a heavy backpack? Do you have a stroller? What drugs do you take? Do you have an ICD? Have you had a heart transplant? All that sort of thing. How well does what you do now treat your most significant symptoms of Barth? And what are the downsides to the treatments that you're doing? How do they affect your daily life? And so in a perfect world, what would you really like for an ideal treatment for Barth? And of course, again, this is the FDA will be listening to this, but so will some industry partners, and maybe they will get some good ideas about what to do. So on the next slide, one of the things I want to talk about is the tone of this meeting before I get to the details on this slide. And this is really important. One of the things I admire most about our really wonderful BSF community is that no one is a whiner. We really talk to each other and we really share, and we don't dwell on the difficulties, but we share info and we dream up solutions and we support each other. And our guys are just amazing. They are not defined by their condition. They participate in life and contribute. And they were born with Barth, and so they know nothing else. But this meeting is not a time to minimize the impact of this terrible disease. We need to convey urgency. We need to be honest and descriptive and complete and not sugarcoat our comments. So, for example, instead of saying, if asked about school, sure, I go to high school, it would be more helpful to say, whatever's honest, but I'll just give an example. Yes, I go to high school, and I've only missed, 12 days this year due to illness. But my mom drives me because I can't ride my bike, and I see the nurse every day to take my 3 meds. And I have a second set of books that I leave at home because I can't lift my heavy backpack. And I have a scooter to get around my high school because the campus is so huge. And I'm the manager of the football team because I can't play sports. And now I can spend less time with my families because they're constantly on the go and I can't really keep up. I mean, that's a long-winded answer, but I'm trying to give a flavor of the kinds of things we need to convey, because the audience here and the voice of the patient needs to really give a sense of what this disease is like and why they should spend their time working on solutions for it, why it's urgent, and why it will be beneficial to us if they are successful. So there will be a number of times, as I mentioned briefly, for everybody in our community to participate. Going to the slide now here, the first way, of course, is the panelists. So there are 10 panelists who've already been selected and are preparing their testimonies. Everyone in the audience, both patients and caregivers, both in the audience and listening in online, will be able to answer polling questions. So everyone will need a cell phone or a computer and be signed in. James at the time will tell you exactly how to answer all those questions, and we'll have some communication before the meeting about that as well. And then we also mentioned that there will be discussion, open discussion in the audience for a period after each panel with patients and caregivers to add to whatever's already been said. the moderator, who's James, will ask some questions, and you can raise your hand and come to the microphone and respond. And then for the folks online, unfortunately, they cannot give testimony that day. There's no way for them to phone in. So we are going to hold open for 30 days the opportunity for anyone who would like to write something, either that they forgot to say at the meeting, or when thinking about it afterwards, they thought they could say better, or wanted to add, or for the folks who were away, they could contribute when they couldn't at the time. So there's a lot of opportunity for participation, and we really, really want everybody to do so. As I mentioned earlier, to have 25% of our world's population present will be astonishing. But if we can get even more people to participate, that would be even better. So we need everybody. And I would love your help also in getting others who aren't on this call to understand how important this is and to get their participation. But at this point, I think I will open it to questions.
Thank you both, Kate and James. We have received several questions, but I do want to mention that we're past 12:30 Eastern Time. If you can no longer stay on the call, we understand. We recognize for the East Coast folks in the United States, it's lunchtime and your time may have expired. We will be submitting and distributing a copy of the recording today, so you will not miss anything. If you have questions, please submit them before you leave so that we can engage James and Kate in those responses. But again, thank you for your time. In way of questions, we have received several, and I will present James. In terms of FDA approving drugs for also the approved use in the transplanted population, how will that be a topic of discussion during this meeting such that that group is also included in the discussion?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one thing to note is that the discussion is going to be about your experiences and your preferences, and is not going to be about any particular kind of hypothetical scenario of a potential drug and how it might be useful to you or any particular section of the patient population. So the way that the information that you having experience with transplant becomes valuable is that there might be both similarities and differences in your needs compared to the rest of the Barth syndrome population. And by FDA having the opportunity to hear that, as well as it to get documented in the Voice of the Patient report, FDA will be able to better advise companies on the design of studies that might include both populations, or whether there needs to be differences in how studies are designed for the kind of two subpopulations. And similarly, when they're making benefit risk decisions for a product that might be able to help both subpopulations, there might be differences in the benefit risk trade-offs that you are willing to accept. And so all of that background that you're going to be educating FDA about in terms of, what are the symptoms and burdens in your daily life that have the greatest impact, and what treatments you're currently, using, and what kind of your remaining unmet needs are, might be different. And that goes for any different characteristic within the Barth syndrome community. That will all be brought out during the discussion.
Thank you, James. Another question is, and I think, Kate, this might be a good one for you to answer. Who should we bring to the meeting, in way of the entire family or just the parents? Just inquiring as whether or not the young children should come as well. And also, if you can comment on who else will be there beyond just our community.
Sure, I'm happy to. I without trying to beg the question, I think, like the conference in general, this is a bit of a personal decision. it's a long afternoon. It's a 4.5-hour meeting. And so I don't think young children are probably going to be able either to sustain attention that long or interest. And it would be a huge shame to have people, interrupt the meeting. But if you have a child who you think is old enough to benefit from hearing the panelists, that would be great if they want to come, and they can answer some of the polling questions and that kind of thing. Some questions will be asked only of individuals or will be asked of parents to answer in the voice of the individual if your child's not there or too young or deceased to have responded. But maybe some of the questions the kids could answer themselves. So it's really a personal choice. But this is a formal FDA meeting. It's not a play group. In terms of who will be there, we're still working on that. We're still sending out lots of invitations, but we will have at least those 2 people from the FDA whom I mentioned. We will have our community. We will have doctors and scientists who are there early for their part of the conference, because we've told all of them about this. So it will mostly be the clinical folks, probably, and most of our SMAB. And we will have some industry people. There will be some people from Stealth, and we know there will be some people from a couple of other companies like Stealth who want to come and listen because they're kind of interested in our disease, which is wonderful. I hope that answered the question.
Yes, and I will add also, if you know somebody in industry who you think would be interested in hearing the narratives of our panelists participating in this community-wide event, the PFDD meeting series is quite popular within the commercial sector. Please pass along their contact information to me or to Kate, and we would very much appreciate you facilitating introductions, because we would love to have them in attendance, whether it be in person or remotely. The more we can grow awareness about Barth syndrome and our community's experience, the better it is for us. So that is an appeal to you. If you know somebody, please reach out to us. You have Kate's contact or my own, emily.milligan@barthsyndrome.org. We have time for one last question. Just one moment. Actually, we'll take 2 more. One question that just came in is, if you have more than one child with Barth syndrome, will you be able to do the polling on both of them? James?
Yeah, so unfortunately, you can only do the polling for one individual. So perhaps if there's another family member or caregiver present, you could each, answer for one or the other. But for purposes of kind of the limitations of the polling don't allow us to capture responses across, kind of multiple people you might be representing.
But James is completely right. We hope if you have 2 or 3 people in your family, you will come with 2 or 3 people so that the polling can be done with one individual's answers in mind for each person who's there polling. If you could sort of be that person's representative, that would be marvelous. And that's one of the important reasons why we hope more than one person from your family comes.
And then for those who are attending remotely and cannot be in Florida for this meeting, will there be key times in which they know that they can call in or participate such that they're not listening for the full 5 hours? Or do you suggest that they block out the day and participate fully in the meeting? James, in your experience, what has worked best in this regard? And I will also mention that others, beyond the plea of coffee, we will also have that there for those who are participating in person, and will keep you fully stimulated in the conversation. But James, regarding the remote, those who are remotely joining us?
Yeah, so for the remote participation, the most important thing is for your participation in the live polling questions, which start not right at the beginning of the entire meeting, but after the meeting overview, when we start out with those demographic questions. And it is really important that if you answer one set of polling questions, that you participate in all three sets of the polling questions, the demographics, the topic 1 questions, and the topic 2 questions, because that actually gives us a lot more information about the patient that you're responding on behalf of as a whole. So if you have to join a little late and you miss some of the introductory remarks or the clinical overview, I think that's okay, but I would encourage you to at least try to tune in at the time slot for the meeting overview. That way you're already online when we start the polling questions.
If I could please just add to that, I think James is exactly right. I would like to put a plug in for suggesting that this meeting is important enough that it's actually worth taking a day off from work or half a day off from work. This is our one chance in our lifetime to get to the FDA. As I mentioned, they've only had about 30 of these meetings. They're certainly not going to take a second meeting from any disease group before they get through all 7,000. So this is our one chance. And I think that's important enough that even if you can't take the week off to come to the conference, I would strongly recommend that you at least consider taking half a day off to listen in on this meeting and to participate. We really need your input.
Thank you, Kate. If anybody else has questions following today's call, again, please contact me. It's emily.milligan@barsyndrome.org, or Kate. I can provide her contact as well. We want to make sure that we are addressing all of your questions, and that with that, we could conclude today's webinar. I want to thank each of you for providing really such thoughtful questions, as well as to our presenters, Kate and James, for taking their time, and for you taking your time wherever you may be. As a reminder, a copy of today's recording will be made available for those who were able to participate, as well as those that couldn't take time out of their day. Additional details will follow, so please be on the lookout for those. You'll be receiving more information from us as we get closer to the meeting on July 18th. And again, you may contact me at any time. We thank you and have a lovely day. Goodbye.
Thank you.